Hey provider, this week I tried the Fairphone 6 and it's surprisingly good. Microsoft did something good for Windows for once, and courts decided that training AI on copyrighted books is somehow fine. Welcome to the Friday Checkout. This video was sponsored by 80,000 hours. Okay, for my first story of the week, the Fairphone Gen 6 finally launched, and I think it looks like Fairphone's most promising device yet. I personally like the aesthetics quite a lot, and it's also a little bit more compact and also 9% lighter than the Fairphone 5 was, bringing it closer and closer to just feeling like a normal phone. You can still pop off the back and also swap out up to 12 different parts for easy repairability, including the display, various cameras, etc. Though this time, the battery replacement will require a screwdriver instead of just your fingernails like before. This slight regression allowed Fairphone to fit a bigger 4415 mAh battery into a phone that is also a little bit more compact, which is a trade-off I personally don't mind, but some of you might prefer the even easier swapping from before. Anyway, Fairphone also introduced a new modular system which allows you to swap the back panels for things like a card holder, a finger loop, or a lanyard. That's kinda cool, and there's also this little switch which flips the phone from a regular Android to a kind of minimalist mode without the usual distractions. Nice. But perhaps best of all is that the specs now actually look pretty decent too. There's a Snapdragon 7S Gen 3 chip, which we already know performs very well in phones like the Nothing Phone 3A. There's also 8 plus 256 gigs of memory and an SD card slot as well. There's a 120Hz LTPO OLED screen and also cameras that sound, at least on paper, really decent, like Fairphone using a 50-megapixel Sony Lightyear 700C sensor. In case you're wondering, that's a pretty good modern mid-range camera sensor, and I obviously haven't had much time to test it yet, but if you'd like me to, let me know. Hey, Editing Martin here. I received my Fairphone 6 review unit literally as I was about to press publish on this video. So I can't include any of my test results right now, but if you want to see an actual test of this phone, then let me know and I might just do that. Also, the company still has their usual Fairphone promises like a pretty wild 5 years of warranty, the use of fair trade materials, paying higher wages for people in their supply chain, and also a minimum of 8 years of software support with 7 Android version upgrades. That's great, although I have to point out that their predecessor is still running Android 14, so I wouldn't say speedy updates are guaranteed at all. Anyway, as usual, the price of all of this fairness is that the phone costs 599 euros, which is far from cheap, but hey, at least the phone now actually feels like something you might enjoy using. And sadly, while the team apparently has expanded availability across Europe, to the US the phone will only come through their partner Rayner and only in August, while to the rest of the world there's no direct sales available just yet. Oof. Okay, for my second story of the week, Microsoft has actually announced something surprisingly good for Windows for once. Remember when about a year ago the CrowdStrike outage essentially crashed more than 8 million Windows PCs and collapsed everything from offices to airports? Well, as a response, Microsoft is moving antivirus providers out of the Windows kernel. They just released a private preview of Windows that yeets everyone out. You might remember that CrowdStrike is a security vendor. They were using kernel-level drivers for their antivirus software or whatever. They pushed a bad update and that crashed all the machines. The supposed fix is an alternative system Microsoft is building in cooperation with CrowdStrike, Bitdefender, ESET, Trend Micro, and many other security vendors that still works but will hopefully not crash your system when it itself crashes. Now, Microsoft has to be really careful here because they themselves are a company that makes security software, including antivirus stuff, so they don't want to be appearing like they're taking away access from their competitors, which they're leaving for themselves. So it's a delicate dance, but yeah, this has to happen sooner or later. And meanwhile, anti-cheating engines for games were highlighted as perhaps the next thing to remove from the kernel by Microsoft, and others might follow later too. Okay, and for my third story of the week, we got a major court case that is setting big precedents for what is or is not illegal for AI companies to do. Specifically, earlier this week it was ruled that Anthropic, the maker of Claude, did not breach copyright when training AI on books without permission. Apparently, Anthropic bought a ton of physical books, scanned those, then fed the scans to their AI, and essentially discarded the books afterwards. And the judge ruled that this was fair use since the books were legally bought, which is a huge deal for AI companies if this is upheld. But then Anthropic did also pirate at least 5 million copies of books from Library Genesis, or LibGen, and a few million books from other sources too, and the court ruled that this did infringe the author's copyrights, and so Anthropic will face further trial and possible damages. I mean, a court ruling that a billion-dollar company directly pirating books for profit is illegal. That's like the lowest of the low bars, and I bet that overall, Anthropic and all the other AI companies are popping champagne and celebrating right now. Okay, and moving on to a busy release monitor, we start with Xiaomi, who had a huge event and announced new smart glasses, which should compete against the Meta Ray-Bans. Then they also announced a new flip phone called the Mix Flip 2, which has all the usual flagship specs, including a pretty massive 5165 mAh battery. They also showed off the Pad 7S Pro, which is one of the first devices to use Xiaomi's new self-developed X-Ring 01 chipset. And the final thing worth highlighting is their first ever SUV called the U7, U7 Pro, and U7 Max. These are some pretty good looking specs, and they also start at some aggressive prices like $35,000 to $45,000 in China. Moving on, a really odd launch this week came in the form of the Poco F7. This phone, while otherwise probably excellent, will get a 7550 mAh silicon carbon battery in India, while in the rest of the world they will only get a 6500 mAh one. Why? I mean, that's still good, I guess, but why don't we get the good stuff as well? Anyway, next, Insta360 released the Flow 2 this week as the cheaper version of their earlier Flow 2 Pro. It misses a few features like the little mirror that lets you see yourself while filming, and also some Apple-specific things like support for dock kits, so I think this is mostly aimed at Android users. And meanwhile, last in our release monitor is Meta launching a Quest 3S with a limited edition Xbox collaboration that comes with new colors and also an Xbox controller in the box, and it's aimed at highlighting that you can stream Xbox games via Game Pass inside VR on your device. Now, you can do that on any up-to-date Meta Quest headset with any Xbox controller, so this is mostly a marketing stunt, but yeah, as usual, the links to all the newly announced products are in the description, and let's move on to the brief. And in the brief, we're also starting with Xbox because Microsoft announced their aggregated gaming library on the Xbox PC app, which means you should be able to see your games from the Microsoft Store, Steam, Battle.net, and more, all in one place in preparation for their Xbox handhelds. And next, this week Samsung announced the Exynos 2500, which is its flagship chip that comes with an updated CPU, an AMD-powered GPU with support for ray tracing, and is also built on Samsung's 3nm process, including its new Gate-All-Around process node, and also special new packaging which is hoped to bring major boosts. Now, interestingly, the rumors are saying that this chip will come to the Galaxy Z Flip 7 worldwide to all the markets, including the US, for example, and that, if true, would make this the first Exynos to come to a flagship phone in the US, for example, in many, many years. Let's see if it's true. Then, moving on to regulatory news, the new energy labels for smartphones went mandatory in the EU this week, so phones like the new Fairphone already got their ratings. In fact, there's already a searchable database that I've linked to down below with a few phones on it already. Oh, and editing Martin here, I also just found out that if you go to an e-commerce site like Amazon or MediaMarkt here in the EU, the labels should already be visible all over the place too, so these are going to be really prominent. Cool. And sticking with standards, the HDMI 2.2 spec is official now, and it claims to support bandwidth of up to 96 gigabits per second. That would mean 4K at 480 Hz, 8K at 240 Hz, or even 16K at 60 Hz. Pretty cool. Then next, the upcoming Logitech MX4 Master mouse was leaked, and the biggest change so far seems to be that there's a mysterious new button on it. I have two MX Master 3s, one here in the studio and one for home, and I really hope that the button is not something annoying. Anyway, in more silly news, the Trump phone no longer promises it's made in America, and instead it's now only designed with American values in mind, which is a completely different value proposition. Oh, and the phone has also switched screen sizes, plus the RAM specs have also disappeared from the page. So I guess that means it's just gonna be a different phone altogether, and I really hope the people who pre-ordered won't mind. Oops. Anyway, in more disappointing news, Intel has announced that it will shut down its automotive business. That is pretty crazy, especially considering that they claim 50 million cars have an Intel chip. And sticking with cars, Tesla's much-hyped robotaxi fleet just went live in Austin. The start is very limited with just 10 to 20 vehicles, which are also basically just bog-standard, lightly modified Model Y cars, not the cybercabs which are coming much later, plus there's still a safety driver on board too. Also, Redditors have already compiled a list of all the mistakes that the company's unsupervised vehicles have made in the first couple of days on camera, which is pretty exciting. Now, with robotaxis and AI taking over larger and larger chunks of the world, you might wonder if we're creating a future for ourselves that could end up being dangerous if we're not careful. And today's sponsor, 80,000 Hours, has actually been researching and writing about these kinds of issues for nearly a decade, and they have tons of in-depth material on their website that you can read, like, for example, what an AI-caused existential catastrophe could actually look like. And if just reading about things like this isn't enough for you, then they've also found fields that you could work on to contribute to making things go well, like AI safety technical research or alternatively, AI governance and policy. These are both areas that 80,000 Hours has identified as being particularly impactful. They are a nonprofit that says that the 80,000 hours the average person will spend working is probably the most meaningful resource for making the world a better place, and so choosing to work on important problems is extremely meaningful. They could help you find potential career paths that do good, and they found the ones that I've mentioned particularly impactful. They cover many areas beyond AI too, of course, from pandemic preparedness to nuclear war, animal welfare, climate change, and more, and they make all of their advice and research available on their site for free. They even have a podcast where they have conversations with experts in these fields across nearly 150 episodes. If that sounds interesting, you can get a copy of the 80,000 Hours Career Guide, which distills some of the most important research into a single volume for free at 80,000hours.org/TFC. That is a great place to start, and if you're wondering, they are a non-profit, so everything that they offer is free. So check them out at 80,000hours.org/TFC to get started, and I'll see you next Friday.